Okay, well, thank you very much to Anna and colleagues for the invitation to come and speak at this event. It's been a fascinating day, and hopefully my presentation will segue perfectly from the panel discussion that we've just had. I do want to just give a caveat to my presentation in that I wear two hats. So Anna introduced me as Director of Digital Learning at the University of Leeds, which is true. So it's a senior management role where I'm responsible for operation and strategical issues in technology enhanced learning, including collaborating with partners that the University of Leeds has. But I also have a research role in the School of Education as Professor of Educational Technology. And it's in that capacity that I'm speaking today. So I'm speaking entirely from a research perspective, from an ESRC funded project using research data. I'm not going to be giving you my personal opinions. You may wonder why I'm saying all this up front, but it is very important for me to be distanced from my own role at the university when I'm talking about this work. So this is a project that was funded by the ESRC in the UK and by the National Research Foundation in South Africa. It's in collaboration with the University of Cape Town. It's a 26-month project which finishes at the end of this year, so it's ongoing at the moment, and we have just finished data collection. So the data that I'm going to share with you today is very nascent. It's quite raw, but I think it's pertinent to the conversation that we've just had. We're just at that phase of trying to make sense of our data, and I hope that some of your insight and conversations will help us thinking about this in a broader sense. The other thing to say before I start is that the project is primarily focused on the South African context, but what I'm going to do today is to talk about the data that we've collected in the UK. This is not a comparative study. We're not comparing South Africa and the UK, but we have the UK and South Africa as data sites. Predominant data collection has been in South Africa. As I said, this is a collaboration between the University of Cape Town and the University of Leeds, and the co-PI is Laura Kernovich. Many of you, I'm sure, will know from the Centre for Innovation in Learning and Teaching. Laura is a very strong advocate for the open educational research movement and the Creative Commons approach, and we both have teams within our departments working on this project. As you can see, it is a large research team that are working on this. So as Anna said, the focus of this project is what's called unbundling. We've adopted this phrase, the Unbundled University, to help us try to make sense of some of the things that the panellists have just been talking about in terms of taking apart educational provision to its lowest common denominator, which is the individual course, and packaging those up in different means, normally in an online format, and we're interested in the impact that that is having on education globally, and particularly we're interested in the impact this is having on equality, particularly in the South African context where equality is a very serious issue. Equality plays out differently in the UK market. So the focus of our project is very much about this concept of unbundling, but particularly in the sector that we all live now, which is a marketised sector, and the sector in which digital technology is having a major impact on the educational provision that we all offer. So our focus is very much on the intersection of those three elements. We're trying to understand how the market impacts on educational provision, how is digital technology impacting on educational provision. So we're trying to have a very strong focus, as you can see in this diagram. With any large, complex research project, we have a number of questions that we've been trying to address. They started out, because the project is, 20 months old, we really did start from the point of definition. Unbundling as a term is not well used in the sector. It comes from other sectors, as I'll explain in a minute. So we were trying to literally understand what people mean by the phrase unbundling. We're trying to understand how it's been interpreted both within the sector and out with the sector. This topic that we've been discussing today is a topic of great interest to the media, not only within the academic setting. So we've been trying to understand definitions, we've been trying to understand how people are actually approaching the concept of unbundling, what does it mean in practice within universities, and how does this process of unbundling get influenced by the market and by digital technologies, and what impact is unbundling having on the university, and not only the university itself, but the people within those universities, those being our staff, our students and senior managers. So we're really trying to ask questions about the way that the university is changing as a result of online courses and the emergent market within the sector. So we haven't talked much about principles of marketisation today. It's really interesting to hear a panel discussion. It was almost, I thought, getting to a little bit of a sales pitch at points, but it's interesting to think about how private companies do approach the language of partnering with universities, because universities are obviously established for public good. We all, working in universities, will consider ourselves to be here to support a very important global mission, which is to educate everybody to make a difference in society. But university education has now become marketised, and there is a very large debate about what are the principles of the market as it applies to education. And there are researchers whose work we've drawn on who talk about the fact that education can't ever be a true market, it can only ever be a quasi-market, and that this growth of marketisation, this growth of private companies working with educational providers is what can be termed market making. So whilst we are not a true market, we are contributing to the development of market language, market economics and market dynamics by the activities that are happening within the sector at the moment. If we look across some of the elements of marketisation within the UK and South Africa, people will generally think about massification. The sector has grown massively in many countries around the world and continues to grow and cannot meet the demand of the populations. And university educations have been marketised by the introduction of fees. So in the UK, the fees currently stand at just over £9,000 and could potentially increase even further. In South Africa, which isn't obviously the focus of today, the fees issue is a very large concern because of the equality issue. I'm sure most of you will have heard of Fees Must Fall, which has been a movement happening within South Africa during the time of our project. It has resulted in obviously protests by students and political groups within South Africa. This is a very contentious issue around who should be paying for higher education. And within the universities themselves, universities are struggling to generate the kinds of income that they need to run themselves. They're large businesses, and increasingly universities are looking to third stream income to generate additional revenue over and above their campus-based education. And this is increasingly where the online education is coming in. And you do get university vice-chancellors talking about new income through online students. And this is becoming the language that people are starting to use. And all of this is set in a system which relies very heavily on competition between universities. It very much relies on reputational brand. Universities live off their brands, and they are constantly buffeted by ranking systems, which are increasingly important to students who are the subject of these fees. So without going into very much more detail, I hope you can see that there is a lot of marketisation happening within this sector, and the involvement of private companies working on online education is yet another example of how this is being manifested. In terms of digital technology, which is probably a more familiar ground for most of us in this room, I don't need to spend time describing to you the growth of digital technology both within society and within the education sector. This is a very large business. Educational technology industry is set to grow massively over the next 10 years, and there is very large interest in this sector from both within the education sector but also out with in terms of ed tech companies and edu businesses. This is partly where these partnerships with universities have come from within both the OPM market, the online program management market, but also technical companies, educational technology companies who do partner with universities and also supply services and products, for example, virtual learning environments. Obviously, this has all been shifted by the growth of MOOCs. We've been talking about that in the panel discussion, and particularly, I think, shifted by the evolution of the MOOC space. Whilst we haven't seen this massive disruption or democratization, we're seeing very rapid evolution of the MOOC space into an accredited learning space, into a continuing professional development space, which has very high value for learners. And we are asking questions, obviously, about whether it's also working towards that promise of democratization. Is online education actually widening access? Is it providing access to those who have the greatest need? So the phrase unbundling comes from the computer sector. It was originally a term that was used when hardware and software was bundled together when you bought a computer, and at one point it became unbundled, and this was where the phrase was born. It's been used in a whole variety of different sectors. So it's a new phrase for the educational industry, and it has struggled with definition, but it's reasonably clear when you look at examples, maybe good analogies such as Spotify. So you take the original album, the vinyl, and you think about the fact that you purchased it, whether you liked track 8 to 11 or not, but you were buying the whole thing as a bundle. And now you can go onto Spotify, buy single tracks, and you don't have to ever listen to track 8 to 11. What you can also interestingly do on things like Spotify is rebundle. So the creation of playlists where the people who like track 8 to 11 put them with track 8 to 11 from a different album and create something new is a good analogy in the education space. Somebody on the panel was talking about partnerships between universities where they take individual courses from multiple universities, put them together into a new type of degree. So King's College, Leeds and Sydney all collaborate to produce a new degree with elements produced from each of those three universities. That's what we would refer to as rebundling. So the unbundling of educational provision is basically the single course or module, whatever you want to call it, being provided for credit, often on an online platform, and it may or may not be done in partnership with a private company. The rebundling is when you start to put all of those things together to make bigger awards. You may go all the way up to the full degree. And this is a concept that is not new. It's been happening for a number of years, and the reason for this research project was to examine this phenomenon. We could see it happening, we could see it growing, and we couldn't understand why it was happening so rapidly. How come it felt that university executives were so excited about this, that it was something that had to happen now, and we didn't feel like many people were asking questions about what this phenomenon was actually going to result in. And the landscape has become very complicated very quickly. Thankfully, I haven't had to draw this. There are other people that are doing this, including Michael Feldstein's blog is a fascinating read, but this is a diagram from him just this spring of the players in this space in terms of private companies who are operating at a variety of different levels to support universities to develop content, educational provision, be it single courses or full online degrees. When you try to understand this phenomenon, it really comes down to a number of different types of activities happening, often simultaneously and evolving very rapidly in the ways that companies are working. Unbundling doesn't need to involve private companies. Universities can do this themselves. This is something that can happen by a university taking a single piece of learning and teaching provision, producing a module for credit, providing it on an external platform, and a learner can take a course and get credit. This can be as simple as that. But it often does involve a third party, and those third parties are often either acting as service providers, where they are providing an element of this service, so the university will procure through a contract an element of that bundle, but most often it's happening in partnerships in the way that we talked about during the panel. And this is either partnerships with MOOC platforms, which seems unfair to now use the phrase MOOC providers or MOOC platforms, but it's the easiest shorthand. So it could be a partnership with someone like Coursera or FutureLearn, or it could be a partnership with an OPM such as Pearson. It was good for you to have the panel because it makes this easier. So well done, Anna. So these partnerships are evolving very rapidly, whereas maybe 12 months ago we could have been clear what we thought an OPM was doing. I think literally over the last 2 years their offering is changing. The MOOC providers, so to say, are also changing. They're becoming more like OPMs. The OPMs and the MOOC providers are talking to each other and potentially collaborating with a university, so we might have three-way partnerships. So this is a very rapidly evolving space. It's hard to keep on top of it, and it's clear that it's of great interest to many universities around the world, because we know that the companies are speaking to them all of the time, and speaking to universities are involved in this. So in terms of our project, what we were trying to do was understand all of these kind of questions from a whole variety of different perspectives. So we have done a lot of field work, as I said, primarily in South Africa, but also in the UK, where we've interviewed senior managers in universities and senior leaders, including vice-chancellors, people in roles like Anna, pro-vice-chancellors, those kind of roles, to really understand their decision-making rationale. We've also interviewed and had focus groups with academics, the group of people who are actually interfacing with students and often with companies to create courses. And we've surveyed students as part of the field work. And we've also done a lot of desk research to understand these types of partnerships and how they've been playing out. So as I said, today I'm just going to talk about the UK data and just give you a snapshot of some of the views of senior leaders and academics and students about this whole area of unbundling. So senior managers, executive leaders, vice-chancellors, pro-vice-chancellors generally are very positive about this whole phenomenon for the reasons that I alluded to earlier. This is all about third stream income. It's a way for the university to grow its brand, to have a more international presence. It makes use of content and resources that the university has. It's about repackaging. It's often about growing new cohorts in new markets, which is in line with their strategic ambitions to become more international. And it's also in line with their ambitions to meet a graduate audience who is going to be employable. So this is that shift from universities for public good to universities actually producing workforce, and senior managers in universities are quite relaxed about that shift in focus. They're also quite keen on the fact that they perceive there to be strong student demand for unbundling. They can see that students want more flexible learning pathways, that this approach can support diverse student populations that are not, whose needs are not always met by a 3-year undergraduate degree. However, most senior leaders within universities in the UK are still primarily focused on campus-based blended learning. That is their focus. They're trying to get some kind of level playing field, and online is generally their secondary focus. In most universities, it's not the primary focus. And university executives, thankfully, do place great value in pedagogy. They do understand the need for high quality education. They haven't thrown away all of our principles to make money, thankfully, which is great. They do understand the policy landscape that they live in. However, they have very big questions about the future of UK higher education. Obviously, these interviews are conducted whilst we are all in the contestations of Brexit, which is playing heavily on university leaders' minds, and they're also focusing, as Mark alluded to earlier, on the shifting demographic and the shifting needs. So they're thinking about skills training, they're thinking about degree apprenticeships, they're thinking about a changing demographic. In general, Most executives are positive about commercial partnerships. Some of the reasons were alluded to in the panel. It's all about shared risk, it's about speed to market, it's about adding in expertise that the university doesn't have, and it's about bringing that external challenge, innovation into the university and to support university staff to upskill. So they're generally very positive about these partnerships. When you speak to academics, and of course I'm not saying that no executive leaders in universities are academics, but I'm just making the distinction between the kind of academics on the ground, the teachers. They have slightly different views, so I've expanded this out into a few slides. The academics are very focused on trying to make the best situation that they can for their students, so they're trying to focus on blended learning, they're trying to make it good for their students. They understand that students come in with different needs and that they want a more digital experience, and academics generally understand that online can be supportive for students. But they also see it as a challenge, that it doesn't always meet the needs of all students, and that it's often, it may be excluding groups of students, so it may be excluding students who don't have access to devices, so back to the equality issue. And there are pedagogic concerns often about online and blended learning from academic teachers, that they're concerned about surface learning versus deep learning. But they are having the conversations, which is very valuable, about pedagogy. It's always focused on pedagogy. Academics generally see that digital technology is being used across their universities. They can see that universities are investing heavily in digital technology, but they're concerned that they're not always involved in those conversations and that there's often no follow-through, that academics are just given a product, a platform, a new tool to use, and are expected to be able to support their students in that space. They're also concerned that digital technology doesn't meet the needs of all discipline areas, whereas executives might expect it will work for everybody. We had a number of academics from different discipline areas who say that actually this is just a barrier to our work and it's something that we can't usefully use in our space. Similarly, when you ask academics about unbundling in the UK, and just to say they are generally aware of this stuff, which wasn't necessarily the case in South Africa, they see unbundling as being good for some learners, not for every type of learner. They can see that it adds flexibility, increases internationalization. It might be there good for working with refugees, etc., supporting students who are working. So they can see that it would support some types of learners. They generally believe that unbundling is good for university management. So it's good for the kind of executive level position, and it's good for the OPMs, but they're not always convinced that it's very good for individual academics. They do have very strong concerns about the disaggregation of the curriculum, which is the major issue that we are grappling with, I think, is that this idea of stacking up credentials from different universities without any kind of vertical integration or any idea of a holistic curriculum is very damaging and potentially completely impossible for your average learner to navigate. This requires competency and motivation and very high level of skills for a learner to be able to navigate a course like that. And university academics are also very concerned about the more holistic experiences that are gained at university, and that unbundling might remove many of those, which are important in terms of social skills development, etc. In terms of marketisation, academics are generally much more negative, as you might expect. They are concerned about public good versus profit making, for example. They're concerned about the complexity of collaboration. They find it difficult to navigate the space of working with external parties. And they also are concerned that these relationships are very large. They may be quite unwieldy and they're quickly outdated. So academics can see the partnerships that have been set up 2-3 years ago are already out of date in terms of what the sector is trying to achieve, and that more agility is needed. They're also concerned that unbundling is actually encouraging the consumer approach from students, that they are literally buying products in single units and will have very different expectations to what they do have as a holistic educational experience. Generally, academics are feeling a little bit disengaged, I think, from the whole university level OPM partnership, and it's sometimes hard for them to see why a university has chosen to partner with a particular company and how they are supposed to be leading this and be engaged with this. So this is the context in which universities are working. It's the academics on the ground who are building courses, often with OPMs, and they have quite serious concerns, I think, about some of this stuff. Okay, so moving on, one of the other things that we've done in this project is to try to map the landscape. We've used visual mapping as a tool. It's based in social cartography. And what we've been trying to do is represent the relationships that exist within this space through an interactive map. And we have mapped all of the universities in the country and all of the relationships that those universities have with private companies and the kinds of offering that they make. And this is the part where I take a deep breath, because I've never had to do this myself before, because somebody always does it. So let me just go to our map. Oh, damn it, I'm so close. Okay, so this is an interactive mapping tool. Oh, no, this is your screen thing, so how does this work? So this is an interactive mapping tool where we have plotted all of the universities in the UK, all of the private companies, and how they have relationships with each other. And we're using it as an analytical tool to help answer some of our research questions. And I'm just going to very quickly show you this. This will be produced and made available as open access after the project finishes, so people will be able to take this data set and continue to work on it. But you can see, we can see all the universities in the UK. Unfortunately, we have quite a lot. It's a simpler map in South Africa. They're colour-coded, so for ease of time, the Russell Group are in red. And you can see all of the companies that are working in this space. Companies like Pearson, FutureLearn, Wiley, etc. And what we've done is map those relationships. So a line between two shapes means that they are working together. And what we're doing is using these data to try to see patterns. You can already probably see some. But if you were to take the Russell Group, for example, and look at the partnerships that exist, basically most of the Russell Group are partnering with some kind of company or other. If you take away the Russell Group and look at non-aligned universities, he said, I shouldn't have done this. Wait a second, I can do this. He says, I can't. If you were to be able to take away all the other universities and leave the non-aligned, you'd see they're not partnering, basically, is what it shows you. And so what we're doing is looking at this from a whole different type of perspective. And some examples, this is King's College, we've talked about it, it's obvious. It's Russell Group University partnering with FutureLearn and Pearson. It has a number of MOOCs, which we've got listed here. And so we're asking questions of these data and saying things like, how is it the University of Cambridge has no partnerships? So it's in the Russell Group. It would obviously fit into a pattern of why is it not partnering with everyone else? So we can talk about it, there's lots of reasons. But universities like Lincoln, Lincoln's actually really keen to do this kind of stuff, but nobody wants to partner with it. It's a non-aligned university, it's not got the brand externally, but it's got lots of vocational, professional courses that would be very valuable in other sectors. So, and we've talked about Coventry earlier on. We're very interested in Coventry. Coventry's been through OPM relationships. It's now gone into the space of working with FutureLearn. So basically, we're using these data to kind of interrogate our questions and to understand how these relationships are forming, how they're changing, etc. Okay, I don't think I've got time to talk about the student data, so let me just summarize. What we can see happening is that this is a rapidly changing space. It's changed dramatically over the 20 months of the project. We can see that the private sector is very active You could almost use the word aggressive in this space. We can also see that these relationships are growing, they're increasing, but they're also evolving. So the Coventry example is a fantastic example of them having partnered with OPMs and then moved into a different type of unbundling relationship. We can see that whilst senior leaders are very strongly supportive of this concept of unbundling, academic staff have more concerns and are worried about the impact that this is having on marketisation. I didn't get time to show you the student data, but students, generally postgraduate working students, are much more aware of these opportunities than your average undergraduate student. There's quite low awareness of this, but generally students are looking for lower cost when they're interested in the online space, which is quite at odds with what universities want to do. But when we've spoken to students, they still favour campus-based education at the moment, and quite a large sample that we've looked at. So there's a bit of misalignment between what the universities are doing and actually what the students are looking for, and this private sector is pushing, the private companies are pushing the sector in a direction that it might not want to go in. I'll stop there. Thank you very much. Do you have time for questions? No? We can do it by Twitter if you like, because I've already seen 36 notifications, so just carry on with Twitter if you like.